Before we dive into today's story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below on what you'd do if you were stranded on an alien moon surrounded by enemies. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one unfolds. Dr. Leon Hart had always known war wasn't a place for healers. Yet there he stood, soaked in the humid air of Gen the Prime, the jungle moon that smelled like wet metal and death. He pressed a trembling hand against his helmet, his breath echoing inside like a caged animal. Leon wasn't built like a soldier. He wasn't even supposed to be near a battlefield. But when humanity scattered across the stars, they learned quickly that combat medics couldn't hide behind sterile white walls. They had to run into hell with nothing but a satchel of vials and a mind full of anatomy charts. The trees above him creaked under the constant bombardment that rattled the entire moon. They rose high like spires of ancient cathedrals, shrouded in luminous blue moss. He kept moving through the undergrowth, each step echoing with a soft squelch in the mud. On his wrist, a flickering hologram pulsed, a distress signal pinging from one of the forward scout squads. The message repeated in a cracked, desperate voice, "Sergeant Rivas, critical, no movement, coordinates, repeat." Leon had heard that tone before. It never meant good news. He swiped the hologram away, his jaw tightening. He pulled his hover sled forward, its small engine humming, stacked with medical crates that clanked like iron shackles. The sled carried no weapons, only scanners, synthetic blood packs, and nanite injectors that might buy a few precious minutes. He hated every second wasted. Every vine that whipped against his suit felt like a claw, every shadow a crouching sniper. The Dravek had made Gen the Prime theirs long before the first human troop transports touched down. They moved like the moon's own nightmares, scaled, silent, eyes that shone in the dark like deep-water predators. Leon wasn't thinking about them, not directly. If he did, he wouldn't take another step. When he finally arrived at the marked location, he smelled the coppery tang of spilled blood before he saw it. The clearing looked like a slaughterhouse after a hurricane. Twisted metal from a down-drop shuttle steamed in the pale dawn light. Charred earth curved in blast patterns like spiderwebs. He took a hesitant step forward, slipping slightly on a pool of blood that reflected the moon's soft blue canopy. Among the wreckage, Sergeant Rivas lay sprawled on a broken supply crate, his armor half melted, one arm gone below the elbow. Leon's stomach turned, but he forced his medical instincts to the front of his mind. The man's eyes cracked open at the sound of his boots. "Doc, thought you'd given up on us," Rivas rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Leon dropped to his knees, ignoring the sting of a sharp fragment that sliced through his suit fabric. He grabbed Rivas's shoulder, forcing a grin he didn't feel. "You know me, Sarge. I'm stubborn as hell," he said, pulling out an injector. Rivas's hand clamped weakly onto his wrist, his fingers sticky and cold. Leon worked fast. He scanned the Marine's vitals, his eyes flicking through the AR readouts. It looked worse than it even felt: internal bleeding, collapsed lung, extensive plasma burns. But the way Rivas watched him, half-conscious, desperate, gave Leon no room for hesitation. He slipped a stabilizing drip into Rivas's neck, then patched a nanite foam sealant over the stump of the missing arm. The foam hissed as it fused, and Rivas let out a groan that melted into a gasp. Leon caught the Marine before he toppled over, lowering him carefully onto the sled's padded platform. Leon wiped sweat from his brow, scanning the treeline every few seconds. His heart hammered, drowning out the forest calls. He glanced at his wrist again, noting enemy proximity alerts. Too close. Far too close. Rivas shivered, his lips pale. "They, coming, you need to run." Leon didn't answer. He strapped Rivas in, tightening the harness so fiercely the plastic creaked. With a hand on the sled's control panel, he guided it backward, forcing it along a crooked trail that zigzagged away from the clearing. His mind ran a dozen calculations at once. Field lab distance, estimated enemy patrol routes, Rivas's oxygen levels. None of them ended pretty. A low snarl echoed through the undergrowth behind them. Leon felt it more than heard it, a vibration deep in his spine as if the jungle exhaled around him. His eyes darted toward the shadows, seeing only shifting ferns and the occasional glint of moonlight on wet leaves. He swallowed, forcing the sled faster. Halfway down a shallow ravine, Leon heard the first snap of a branch. Then another. Then a rapid clicking like claws tapping glass. His blood froze. He spun, catching sight of slender, scaled figures slinking from tree to tree. Dravek. There were at least 6, maybe more, moving as one. Their long-barreled rifles gleamed, their jagged blades strapped to their backs. Leon grabbed a small metal tool from his belt, a pulse stim he usually used to restart human hearts. Worthless against them, but his fingers clutched it anyway. Rivas moaned on the sled, drifting in and out. Leon's eyes stung as he scanned the horizon, wishing for another Marine squad, a drone strike, anything. The Dravek leader stepped forward, towering above his soldiers. His scaled crest shimmered with an oily iridescence. He gestured with a hooked claw, signaling the others to close in. Leon's hands went limp at his sides. The leader cocked his head, eyeing Leon as if inspecting a lab rat. His tongue flicked out, tasting the air. He spoke in broken Terran standard, each syllable raspy and jagged. Medic, no fight, no teeth, easy capture. Leon took a shallow breath, trying to steady his hands. His mind screamed to run, to hide, but there was nowhere left to go. He stepped slightly in front of Rivas, shielding the sled with his own body. The Dravek soldiers advanced, fanning out in a wide semicircle that blocked every possible escape route. Leaves rustled under clawed feet. The forest trembled with anticipation. Leon's throat felt like sandpaper. Please, he needs help. Take me, let him go, he said, voice barely above a whisper. The leader let out a sound that might have been laughter, a harsh, scraping echo that filled the clearing. The other soldiers joined in, their teeth bared. They didn't come for bargains. They came for trophies. One Dravek raised his rifle, aiming directly at Leon's chest. Another soldier brandished a blade, twirling it lazily as if savoring the moment. Leon forced himself not to look away. Rivas groaned again, his eyes rolling back. Leon reached behind, placing a trembling hand on the Marine's forehead, as if to comfort him, as if to apologize. In that breathless moment, Leon realized the full weight of his helplessness. He had crossed countless battlefields, patched up hundreds of Marines, watched them rise again from near death. But here, at the edge of the jungle, the medic would die first, alone except for a dying patient who could not even stand. The leader stepped forward, his blade now glowing with a pulsing, sickly red. Leon's knees buckled and he dropped to a crouch. He squeezed the pulse stim so hard it cut into his palm. He thought of his old field lab, of half-empty syringes and handwritten notes. Of promises he made to save every life he could. As the Dravek leader raised his blade high, Leon felt a strange calm wash over him. This would be his last stand, the final chapter of a medic who never wanted to be a hero. He squeezed his eyes shut, leaning forward slightly as if to take the blow head-on. Somewhere deep in the jungle, something moved. A low growl, so deep it rattled the moss hanging from the trees. A heavy footfall echoed, followed by another, slow and deliberate. The Dravek soldiers paused, their heads turning in unison. Leon opened his eyes, startled by their sudden hesitation. Their crests flattened, eyes wide. The forest went deathly silent, every insect, every bird stopping as though the moon itself held its breath. Leon's heart thundered against his ribs, and for the first time since the ambush, he felt something foreign crawl up his spine. Oh, he didn't understand it yet. He didn't know what waited in the darkness. But he clutched Rivas's harness tighter, and he kept his eyes open. Because something was coming. And it wasn't afraid. Leon didn't dare move. His muscles locked, his breath caught halfway in his throat as the alien soldiers shifted uneasily, their scaled hides rippling in nervous waves. The Dravek leader let out a low hiss, turning his blade in one clawed hand as though preparing for a new, unknown threat. Leon's mind darted from possibility to possibility, but each scenario ended with him and Rivas dead on the jungle floor. He gripped the sled's edge so tightly his knuckles went pale beneath the suit's polymer weave. The sound came again, that guttural rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate straight through Leon's bones. It rolled out from the deeper undergrowth beyond the Dravek formation, each echo sending the soldiers one step back. Leaves shivered, entire vines trembled as though a silent hurricane passed through. Leon risked a glance down at Rivas, who was drifting in and out of consciousness, oblivious to the gathering storm. The leader snapped his fingers and two soldiers moved to flank Leon, stepping forward to drag him from the sled. Their movements lost the lazy arrogance they'd worn moments before. Now they moved with urgency, heads jerking toward the forest, eyes darting to every patch of shifting green. The leader barked out more guttural commands in their native tongue, words that sounded like bones scraping across rock. Leon felt hands grab at his arm, cold and hard like living stone. He struggled instinctively, twisting away, planting his feet in the mud. One soldier snarled and swung the back of his clawed hand into Leon's helmet. Stars exploded in his vision. He dropped to his knees, tasting blood. He heard Rivas groan faintly behind him, felt his own pulse roar in his ears. The growl answered again. Closer now, impossibly close. A new sound joined it, the snapping of branches thicker than Leon's thigh, the crunch of roots torn from the ground. The Dravek soldiers froze mid-motion, one lowering his blade as though doubting its usefulness. Leon forced his head up, blinking past the pain, determined to see what loomed in the darkness. The first shape emerged from the tangled vines like a phantom from a nightmare. Its eyes burned low and gold, cutting through the fog and undergrowth with an unearthly glow. A broad, armored head followed, layered in chitinous plates streaked with dark, mossy green. The creature's shoulders were wider than Leon's entire sled, its forelimbs corded with muscle and ending in claws the size of machetes. Steam curled off its scales with each heavy breath. Agur. Leon's mind flooded with memories he'd buried beneath layers of duty and fear. The days he spent feeding the young predator in the lab's hidden tanks. The first time Agur had leaned against him like an oversized hound, seeking warmth. The classified orders to terminate the creature when it outgrew the tanks, orders Leon ignored at the risk of court-martial. He never imagined he would see this form so fully matured, so massive and terrible. The Dravek leader staggered back, swinging his blade between Leon and the beast. His soldiers scrambled to form a line, but their discipline had already started to fracture. Agur moved forward slowly, each step deliberate, powerful, patient like a hunter savoring the moment before a kill. His low growl rose to a deep, resonant snarl that echoed against the canopy above. Leon tasted adrenaline mixed with blood. He staggered upright, reaching one hand toward Agur as if reassuring a friend rather than commanding a monster. Agur's golden eyes flicked to Leon for an instant, and the growl softened, replaced by a brief, almost gentle huff of breath. The connection between them was immediate and absolute. Leon's hand fell to his side, his shoulders sagging in a wave of relief and disbelief. The Dravek leader roared, snapping his blade up and rushing forward with surprising speed. The remaining soldiers surged after him in a final desperate charge. The leader aimed directly for Leon's chest, blade glowing with a sickly pulse. Leon felt his feet locked to the ground, mind screaming at him to move but his body refusing. Agur exploded forward, a living storm of muscle and claws. In one bound, he intercepted the leader mid-strike, claws cleaving through armor and scales as though they were paper. Blood sprayed in a dark arc across the mud. The leader's eyes widened in frozen horror before Agur's jaws closed around his torso and snapped him in half with a wet crunch. The pieces hit the earth, lifeless and steaming. The soldiers shrieked, an awful high-pitched keening that no human voice could produce. They stumbled over each other, scrambling backward, firing wildly. Plasma bolts slammed into Agur's shoulders and flanks, burning shallow trenches in his armored hide. He barely flinched. His massive tail whipped around, sweeping two soldiers from their feet and sending them crashing into trees so hard their chitinous exoskeletons shattered. Leon watched, frozen by both awe and horror. He knew Agur was powerful. He had read the data, watched the biometric readouts. But the raw reality was something beyond charts and genetic profiles. Agur moved like a force of nature, rage and loyalty fused into an unstoppable tide. The final two soldiers tried to flee, stumbling over roots and fallen vines. Agur lunged forward, claws flashing, reducing them to mangled heaps in seconds. When the last echo of plasma fire died away, the jungle fell silent again, save for Agur's heavy breaths. Leon realized he hadn't taken a full breath in what felt like forever. He sank to his knees, hands trembling. Agur stood a few paces ahead, chest heaving, blood dripping from his fangs and claws and thick ropes. Slowly, carefully, Leon raised his hand again. Agur turned toward him, golden eyes narrowing with something that looked like concern. The beast stepped forward, each footfall heavy enough to shake the mud. He lowered his massive head until his snout almost touched Leon's chest. Leon pressed his forehead against the scaled plate, closing his eyes, allowing himself one brief moment of surrender. Agur exhaled, a warm rush that smelled of iron and earth. Leon reached up and traced the scarred ridge above one of Agur's eyes, the mark from an old failed experiment that almost killed him years ago. Even now, it remained a shared wound, a private history. Behind them, Rivas moaned again. Leon's eyes snapped open. He turned quickly, stumbling to the sled, scanning the Marine's vitals. Oxygen levels dangerously low, heart rate faltering. Leon grabbed a stim from his belt and injected it into Rivas's neck. The Marine gasped, eyes shooting wide open, before settling into a shallower but steady rhythm. Agur watched in silence, head cocked, the golden eyes softening further. Leon could almost feel the tension bleed out of the predator's coiled muscles. He reached for a bandage, pressing it to Rivas's side, working by instinct. His hands moved quickly now, practiced and sure, though his mind still replayed the battlefield in stark flashes. Rivas managed a hoarse laugh, eyes flickering toward Aguirre. "Doc, you get a new pet?" he whispered. Leon let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, pressing harder on the bandage. "He's been with me longer than any of you," Leon said, voice raw. He didn't explain further. The explanation belonged only to him and Aguirre. Once the bleeding slowed, Leon checked the sled's controls again, cursing softly at the error messages flashing in red. The power cell was nearly drained from the forced retreat. He'd have to call for evac and fast before Rivas slipped under again. Leon tapped his comm unit, breath hitching as he tried to control the tremor in his fingers. Static crackled, then a faint, distant voice answered. "Field command, repeat field command." "Who is this?" "This is Dr. Leon Hart," he said, voice low but firm, every syllable pressed between shallow breaths. "I have Sergeant Rivas alive but critical. Enemy force neutralized. Immediate evac needed at coordinate Delta 79. Pause. Then a burst of hurried voices in the background. "Doctor, confirm, enemy force neutralized? Do you require combat assistance?" Leon glanced at Aguirre, who had now circled back to sit beside him, massive tail curling protectively around the sled. The predator's eyes stayed locked on the treeline, muscles taut as though expecting more danger. Leon swallowed, his gaze dropping to the mud-smeared ground. "Negative," he said softly. "We're secure." He closed the comm and turned back to Rivas, checking his pulse again, applying another stabilizing patch. The Marine's eyes drifted closed, his breathing growing shallower but still strong enough to keep him alive for now. Leon felt a weary relief spread through his chest. Aguirre leaned down, brushing Leon's arm gently with the edge of his snout. Leon turned, meeting the golden eyes once more. In them, he saw the same question he saw in countless Marines' faces. "Am I safe? Will you stay?" He raised a trembling hand, brushing the blood-slick scales. "Yes," Leon whispered, more to himself than to the creature. "We're okay. For now." A distant whir of dropship engines began to echo across the sky. Leon looked up, shoulders finally sagging. The first rays of Gen the Prime's day cycle pierced the canopy, flickering in through the mist like hesitant fingers. Aguirre rose, towering above both men, casting a wide protective shadow across the sled. Leon felt something crack in his chest, not fear this time, but an unexpected bloom of defiance, of raw, stubborn hope. As long as Aguirre watched over them, he realized he might not be as powerless as he always believed. A roar thundered across the clearing, deep and final, as if declaring to the moon itself that the hunt was over. Leon's breath caught. He looked up, hand resting on the sled as he steadied himself. Aguirre turned, his gaze sweeping the jungle one last time. No one moved. No threat dared to appear. For now they had won. Leon stood beside the beast, listening to the whine of engines approaching, feeling the first warmth of sunlight on his helmet. He knew this moment was temporary, fragile as a heartbeat. But it was enough to keep him moving forward. Enough to keep him alive. Leon stood in the clearing, every muscle aching as if he had run for miles. The smell of scorched ozone from the plasma bolts clung to the air, mixing with the coppery tang of spilled blood and the rich, damp scent of the jungle floor. His helmet's internal display blinked warnings about his vitals, heart rate, dehydration, microfractures from the blow to his head, but he ignored them. All he saw was Aguirre breathing deeply, his broad shoulders rising and falling like a storm-tossed sea. Aguirre shifted his weight, claws digging into the mud as he listened to the distant hum of approaching engines. His tail lashed side to side, thick as a tree trunk, leaving deep grooves behind him. Leon watched the enormous predator and felt an unexpected calm. In that quiet moment, the years of secrecy and shared survival between them rose to the surface like old ghosts. He knelt beside Rivas again, checking the seals on his wounds. The Marine's breathing had steadied into a rough rhythm, each exhale a wet rasp that reminded Leon how fragile human life remained out here. Leon tightened a strap on the sled, pressing one last clotting patch against Rivas's side. Rivas stirred slightly, his lips twitching into a half-smile even in his unconscious state. Leon looked up at Aguirre and exhaled slowly. "Hold steady," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as though talking to a skittish horse rather than a monstrous apex predator. Aguirre lowered his massive head, eyes flickering in the thin shafts of sunlight that cut through the canopy. The creature let out a quiet, rumbling sound, a noise Leon had heard only a few times, something close to a purr but far deeper, resonating like a drum in his chest. A soft static buzzed in Leon's earpiece. "Dr. Hart, we're descending now. Visual on your signal flare. ETA 2 minutes. Prepare for extraction." The voice was clipped, efficient, yet he could sense the relief behind each word. He tapped twice on his wrist confirming receipt, but he didn't dare take his eyes off Aguirre. He knew the evac crew wouldn't expect to find a living monster standing guard. In fact, no one in the entire campaign even knew Aguirre existed outside a few buried research logs Leon had deliberately erased. Once a secret military prototype meant to guard only the highest-ranking officers, Aguirre was slated for termination after the first field tests went wrong. Leon had refused, slipping the juvenile creature into his private med bay under the guise of failed tissue experiments. Over time, the Predator became something more than a project, more than a weapon. A friend. A guardian. A promise that no one under Leon's care would ever die alone again. The humming engines grew louder, sending ripples through the jungle foliage. Birds and small creatures fled in squalls of motion, branches shaking above them. Leon rose, standing beside the sled and holding up a hand to signal the dropship pilot. The aircraft broke through the upper canopy with a rush of displaced air, its wide landing struts crushing vines and small trees as it descended. Dust and debris spun in tight cyclones around them. Aguirre stepped forward, growling low at the dropship. Leon quickly moved in front of him, arms out, palms open. "Easy, easy," he called, his voice cracking slightly as he pushed every ounce of authority and comfort into those words. Aguirre's tail froze mid-swing. The Predator's eyes flicked between Leon and the descending craft, nostrils flaring. After a tense second, he lowered his head again, though every muscle in his body remained coiled and ready. The hatch on the dropship swung open with a hiss, and 2 armored Marines sprinted down the ramp, rifles half raised as they scanned the clearing. The first Marine stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Aguirre. His visor turned toward Leon, then back to the towering beast, unable to decide which target demanded more attention. Leon waved them forward impatiently. "Move. Rivas is critical," he barked. The command snapped them out of their paralysis. One Marine dashed to the sled, checking Rivas's straps, while the second moved to support Leon. The man's helmet hid his expression, but his trembling hands betrayed his shock. "Sir, is that thing?" the Marine started, voice muffled by his helmet. Leon didn't look at him. "He's with me. Focus on the patient." The Marine hesitated, then nodded sharply and grabbed the sled's handle. Together they lifted and maneuvered it toward the ramp, stepping around shattered Dravek bodies and smoldering plasma scorches. Aguirre's gaze tracked them every step, his claws flexing into the ground. The second Marine moved behind Leon, hand hovering near his sidearm, but he didn't dare draw it. As the sled disappeared into the dropship's hold, Leon turned back to Aguirre. The creature shifted forward, closing the gap between them. Leon reached up and pressed his forehead to the armored snout again. For a long second neither moved. Leon heard nothing but Aguirre's slow breathing and the thudding in his own ears. "You can't come with us," Leon murmured, his voice almost swallowed by the roar of the engines. "You know that. They won't understand. They'll kill you before they ask questions." Aguirre let out a low, mournful sound that reverberated across the clearing. Leon pressed his hand to the scar above Aguirre's eye. He swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "I'll come back. I promise," he said, knowing full well that promises were fragile things in war. Aguirre gave a slow blink, the gesture almost human in its sadness. Then he turned, muscles rippling under thick armor plates, and padded back into the treeline. He vanished so completely that the branches barely moved after he passed. Only the deep grooves in the mud and a faint trail of steaming blood remained to mark his presence. Leon watched the trees long after Aguirre was gone. The first Marine returned and guided him gently but firmly up the ramp. Once inside, Leon staggered to the side and dropped into a crash seat, every ounce of adrenaline bleeding out at once. The Marine removed his helmet, revealing a young face, pale and soaked in sweat. "What the hell was that thing, Doc?" the Marine asked, eyes wide and voice cracking. Leon looked past him at Rivas, who lay strapped down, a medic working frantically over his chest. Rivas would live now. That was all that mattered in this moment. Leon leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment as the roar of the engines swallowed the last of the jungle sounds. "That," Leon finally answered, his voice flat and exhausted, "was the reason I'm still alive. And the reason he is too." He jerked his chin toward Rivas without opening his eyes. The Marine swallowed hard, clearly not understanding but too overwhelmed to press further. The dropship lurched as it lifted, the world below shrinking into a chaotic tapestry of green and blue and dark smudges where the fighting still raged. Leon opened his eyes and stared at the deck plating beneath his boots, every line and scratch pulling him away from the image of Agur disappearing into the foliage. Rivas groaned weakly from the medical bed. Leon pushed himself up and moved to his side, gripping his shoulder carefully. The Marine's eyes fluttered open, confusion twisting across his features before recognition settled in. Rivas coughed and tried to speak, but only a thin wheeze escaped. "Don't try," Leon said gently, pressing a fresh oxygen mask to his face. "You're going to be fine. Save your strength." Rivas's hand twitched against the strap, his fingers curling around Leon's wrist. His eyes glistened with something that looked almost like gratitude or relief, or maybe just the basic animal instinct of a man who had glimpsed death and slipped away. Leon looked up at the medic tending Rivas, nodding once. The medic returned the nod, turning back to adjust the fluid lines. The second Marine hovered near the ramp, still glancing nervously at the jungle below as if expecting the predator to leap after them at any moment. Leon finally stepped back, his legs trembling beneath him. He braced himself against the wall again, breathing slow and deep. He forced his mind to focus on what came next, stabilizing Rivas, reporting to Field Command, the inevitable questioning about the destroyed Dravak patrol, the hundreds of regulations he had broken by keeping Agur alive. But beneath it all, a stubborn ember of defiance burned bright. He didn't regret any of it. Not a single decision. He replayed Agur's last gaze in his mind, the silent understanding in those golden eyes. Leon knew their bond wasn't something the military would ever recognize, let alone approve. But out there, in that hostile jungle, it had been more powerful than any rifle or drone or armored squad. A creature built to kill had chosen to guard a medic instead, to stand as a living wall between death and the wounded. There was something in that choice that felt more human than any order he had ever followed. The dropship banked hard, the engine screaming as it pushed toward orbit. Leon closed his eyes and let the vibration of the hull soak into his bones. In his mind, he pictured Agur pacing the edge of the treeline, watching the sky, waiting. Leon whispered into the empty air, not caring if anyone heard him. "I'll come back. You won't be alone." The words felt both like a vow and a curse, heavy enough to settle into his chest and refuse to leave. Outside, the sky flared as plasma cannons and anti-air batteries continued to light up the horizon. Inside the ship, Leon pressed his forehead to the cool wall, eyes open but unfocused, as he counted each passing second like a heartbeat. Above the chaos, above the blood and wreckage, something in him refused to die. Something stronger than fear, more stubborn than orders. Something that would lead him back to that jungle, back to the creature waiting for him. Because even a medic could have an apex protector. And sometimes an apex protector needed his medic just as desperately. Leon didn't sleep on the flight back. He sat hunched against the bulkhead, one hand still gripping a blood-slicked strap on the med sled, the other curled into a fist so tight his nails bit into his palm. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Agur's golden gaze vanish into the jungle, that last quiet plea echoing through the dark corners of his mind. The dropship rocked under him, jolting through the atmosphere, but Leon barely felt it. He forced himself to focus on the rhythmic rise and fall of Rivas's chest, the steady beep of the vitals display that cut through the engine roar like a lifeline. When they finally broke orbit and docked with the forward medical carrier, Leon staggered off the ramp, squinting against the sterile brilliance of the hangar lights. A rush of technicians, Marines and medical staff flooded toward the sled, calling out orders and updates in sharp, clipped bursts. Someone grabbed Leon's arm, guiding him toward a decontamination chamber, but he twisted free, stumbling back toward Rivas. A senior medic stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Dr. Hart, you're compromised. We need to debrief you and get your wounds treated." Leon's voice cracked when he answered. "I'm not leaving him." The medic hesitated, studying Leon's wild eyes and shaking hands. Then he nodded sharply and stepped aside, letting Leon follow the sled down the corridor. Leon kept pace as best he could, his boots smearing a trail of dirt and dried blood across the pristine floor. At the med bay entrance, they peeled Rivas away from him, the doors sliding shut with a heavy finality that left Leon standing alone. He pressed his forehead against the glass, staring into the operating room where machines hummed and lights flashed. Even through the reinforced barrier, he could see the fierce determination on the surgeons' faces, the flicker of life in Rivas's eyes every time his body tried to give out. Leon knew that fight intimately. It was the same one that had carried him through every triage nightmare, every ambush and retreat. The same fight that had echoed in Agir's growl when he stepped between Leon and the blade. A young Marine in a crisp uniform appeared beside him, shifting nervously as he waited to speak. Leon ignored him, eyes locked on the operating table. The Marine cleared his throat, tapping a data slate against his leg. "Dr. Hart, Field Command wants a full account immediately," he said, voice tight, eyes flicking toward the sealed doors. They also have questions about the creature mentioned in your transmission." Leon turned slowly, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "Creature," he repeated, the word tasting wrong in his mouth. "His name is Agir." The Marine opened his mouth, but no words came. Leon stepped forward, snatching the data slate from his hands. He scrolled through the list of orders and demands, each line a reminder that bureaucracy always arrived before compassion. Leon's eyes narrowed as he read the final instruction: containment protocols to be enacted upon recovery of the anomalous asset. Termination authorization granted. He felt something inside him snap. His fingers tightened on the slate until the casing cracked. The Marine took a quick step back, hand hovering over his holstered sidearm. Leon dropped the shattered device at his feet. "You don't get to touch him," Leon said, each word edged in steel. "You don't get to decide who lives and dies out there from behind these walls." The Marine swallowed hard but didn't answer. Leon turned away, pressing both hands to the glass again. Inside, the surgical team leaned back, exhaustion and relief etched into their faces. Rivas's vitals steadied, a single, unwavering line of life that glowed across the screen. Leon's breath shuddered out of him, his shoulders finally slumping. Rivas was alive. One promise kept. Leon pushed away from the glass and staggered down the hall, his vision tunneling as adrenaline drained from his veins. Voices echoed around him, calls for security, for medics, for commanding officers. He ignored them all, moving with singular purpose. His mind whirred with images of Agir waiting in the jungle, alone and hunted, as official orders circled above like vultures. In the corner of a supply alcove, Leon found a discarded field pack and a set of scout armor. He stripped out of his torn medic suit, each movement raw and painful, revealing bruises that mapped his ribs in dark blossoms. He forced himself into the scout armor, wincing as cracked ribs shifted under the rigid plates. Every motion felt like a betrayal to his own body, but he couldn't stop. Not now. He secured a belt of stim injectors, spare energy cells, a portable field scanner. His hands moved automatically, trained by endless nights prepping for evacuations that never came. When he finally snapped the helmet into place, his reflection in the metal locker door stopped him. His face, sharp and haunted, eyes too bright and wild. For the first time he saw what his Marines must have seen all along. A man willing to walk straight into hell if it meant saving one more life. He pulled the helmet down, sealing away that fragile humanity beneath the visor. Then he slipped back into the corridors, head lowered, steps quick but deliberate. Alarms started to echo behind him as the command center realized he was gone, security teams flooding the walkways. Leon ducked under maintenance scaffolds, slid past arguing technicians, his breath hitching with every turn. Near the docking bay, a small recon shuttle stood prepped for atmospheric re-entry, its engines humming quietly in standby mode. A single ground crew technician leaned against it, reading a status tablet. Leon moved without hesitation, swinging the butt of his scanner into the side of the technician's helmet. The man crumpled silently, sliding down the hall. Leon dragged him behind a storage crate, whispering a strained apology before stepping over him. He sealed the ramp, flipped through startup protocols with fingers that blurred from the rush of pain and fear. The engines rumbled to life beneath him, vibrating up through the seat into his bones. As the hangar doors screeched open, Leon punched the thrusters, feeling the shuttle lurch forward like a breaking wave. Command voices screamed through the comm channels, threatening weapon locks and override codes. Leon ignored them, guiding the shuttle through the starfield and back toward the moon's thick atmosphere. Heat blazed across the hull, the entire vessel groaning as it cut through layers of blue and gold clouds. Leon leaned forward, eyes fixed on the readout that slowly resolved into the dense canopy of Gen the Prime. He didn't bother with a stealth approach. Agir would hear him, feel him, sense him long before he touched the ground. Leon's breath rattled inside the helmet, every heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. As he descended, he saw scars in the jungle where Agir had battled, charred clearings and broken trees that formed a silent trail. A promise marked in blood and claw. The shuttle slammed into the clearing with a bone-jarring thud, metal struts biting deep into the mud. Leon ripped off his helmet, stumbling into the humid air. The smell hit him instantly, wet earth, rotting foliage, and the faint tang of scorched chitin. He staggered forward, lungs burning, voice breaking as he called into the trees. Aegir, I'm here. You're not alone. The jungle held its breath. Then a low, rolling growl emerged from the shadows, deep and hungry and relieved all at once. Aegir stepped out, head lowered, golden eyes locked on Leon. The predator's sides heaved, wounds still seeping faint trails of dark blood. But his eyes burned bright, clear and sharp. Leon took a single step forward. Aegir bounded the rest of the distance, nearly knocking him off his feet as his massive head slammed into Leon's chest. Leon threw his arms around the thick, scaled neck, fingers digging into warm ridges. A sob tore free from his throat, a raw sound that tasted of salt and metal. You waited, Leon whispered, pressing his forehead against the scar above Aegir's eye. I told you I'd come back. Aegir rumbled low, the sound vibrating deep in Leon's chest like a second heartbeat. Leon leaned back slightly, meeting those golden eyes again. There was no fear there, no wildness beyond control. Only trust. Only recognition. Behind them, the shuttle's engines whined down into silence. Leon knew command would come for him. They would send squads, drones, protocols stacked like knives against his neck. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He had made his choice long before he ever stepped onto this moon. He turned toward the shuttle and then back to Aegir. We go together, he said, his voice hardening into something fierce, unbreakable. No more hiding. No more leaving you behind. Aegir's growl rose again, louder now, echoing into the canopy above like a war cry. Leon felt it surge through him, flooding his veins with warmth and purpose. They had been pieces of different worlds, forced into shapes by orders and chains. But together they were something new, something the military could never catalog or tame. Leon stepped forward, guiding Aegir toward the shuttle's open ramp. The predator moved carefully, each massive footfall a vow in the mud. When they reached the ramp, Aegir paused, sniffing the unfamiliar metal. Leon laid a hand on his snout, urging him onward. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Aegir climbed inside, his bulk filling the shuttle's narrow bay. Leon followed, sealing the hatch behind them. He dropped into the pilot's seat, glancing over his shoulder once to see Aegir settle down, eyes still fixed on him. Leon's fingers danced across the controls, setting a new course, somewhere beyond military reach, beyond orders and rules. The engines roared to life again, lifting them slowly into the heavy dawn sky. As they broke through the first layer of clouds, Leon felt the crushing weight of the past fall away, replaced by the sharp, exhilarating rush of freedom. He glanced at Aegir, who watched the rising sky with a low, curious rumble. Leon allowed himself a small, tired smile. Together, he said again, a word that felt both fragile and invincible. Aegir's answering growl rolled through the cockpit like thunder, sealing their promise. Outside, the jungle shrank into a shifting mosaic of green and blue, the scars of battle already fading in the morning haze. Above them, the stars waited, silent witnesses to the bond they had forged, the battles they had survived. Leon guided the shuttle higher, eyes fixed on the infinite darkness ahead. For the first time in years he felt alive in every cell, every breath. He knew they were hunted now, that their journey would be a constant flight from capture and death. But he also knew they would face it the same way they had faced every blade and claw, side by side. A medic and his apex protector, free at last.